So adolescence, as I understand it, is a place, a path, and a purpose. So typically adolescence occurs in a particular context, usually a school setting. But if you just focus on the school setting, you miss many kids who aren't part of that setting. But it is a particularly formative setting. It's a place where young people are apart from adult supervision largely, creating their own culture, trying to understand who they are against their peers, and investing in their future perhaps, or trying to avoid things, learning how to cope with challenges and difficulties. So there's a place, when you think of adolescence, often you think of a place, the high school. It's also a path. You're not supposed to stay in adolescence forever. It's a developmental stage. So you can talk about early adolescence and the tween years, and you can talk about adolescence proper, late adolescence, and even early adulthood. This event, this life event that's stretching, that begins in biology with the onset of puberty and ends with your assimilation into society. And so that's the path aspect and points towards the purpose. The purpose of adolescence is to discover an identity, figure out who you are and who you're going to be and how you're going to contribute to society. And that informed understanding comes with the input of peers and comes with the input of adult guarantors, older individuals who you look up to who help support you in this process. So typically we think of adolescence as a stage of human development that has the purpose of moving us toward independence and assimilation into society. So adolescence, even thought of as a place, path, and a purpose. Well, that you can throw a monkey wrench into that whole process if you think of adolescence only in terms of developmental aspects. So there's cognitive development, psychosocial development, there's neurological development, your brain's still developing, particularly the frontal lobe. And so we can't break down a person into these discrete parts and say that's all of what a person is. And sometimes something happens in the midst of this development that'll cause a challenge to being able to, I suppose, complete what you would normally consider the tasks of adolescence, moving towards independence, developing an identity. One of those things can be a disability. But disability isn't a surprising thing. It's actually an unsurprising aspect of human existence. About 20% of people have disabilities. It's the largest minority group. It's an open minority group. You can enter it. You likely will enter it at some time by accident or age. You may enter it for a short period of time or for a long period of time. And when you do, that can have consequences for this process of developing an identity, because it could have an impact for how you interact with peers. It could have an impact for what your job is, how you're mirroring your image against people for relationships and these sorts of things. And when that's the case, the tendency is for people to take that whole group and say that group is disabled, that group is developmentally disabled, that group is physically disabled, that group then will be excluded somehow. And so we have to think more broadly in terms of human diversity and think of disability as an aspect of diversity instead of thinking of disability as something so terribly different. Because we're uncomfortable with what disability reminds us about ourselves, the fact that we're vulnerable and contingent beings and that we didn't get to choose our genes and that there are many things that can happen in life that can steer us off what we think is our course, we tend to homogenize disability. We say they're all the same, and then it's easier to deal with. Or we can pluralize disability and say, well, we're all disabled. We all have disabilities. But then that doesn't take seriously the challenges and supports needed by some people with disabilities to be fully included so that they can develop develop their personhood in relation to others. Sometimes we can demonize disability. We can say, well, that's just that's their problem. And people even still today talk about the disability as a result of sin or something like that. Even if you don't go that far, maybe you can consider the discussion around Adam Lanza, when it was found out that he was on the autism spectrum, then people said, well, he can't form these kind of close relationships, and maybe that's why he behaved this way. So you demonize this difference instead of recognizing that people are different. And there's neurodiversity. There's different ways of perceiving the world and relating to people related to how our brain functions. And another thing that we can do is we can romanticize disability. And that's, if you ever watch Saturday Night Live, there's an interesting skit called Champ, where there's a wrestler and they let the wrestler win. And they're sort of making fun of this whole, what the disability movement calls inspiration porn, actually. It's inspiration porn, the happy, good feeling story, the only time someone with a disability makes it in the news. So we can avoid those ways of engaging differences and think about disability just as an aspect of our diversity, which everyone's growing more comfortable talking about.